I want to speak about some campaigns, two campaigns, and the lesson learned out of these campaigns. So, our major problem in dealing with this kind of work is how to engage with people who doesn't want to be engaged. So, that's a target group who didn't want to go with you in contact. So, that was the question that we tried to solve. And we tried to do this with two campaigns. I will give just the short pictures of this. And if you are interested, you could also, you will find videos on YouTube about this or on our homepage or in the RAN database. So at first, there's the Trojan T-Shirt. The idea was just very short. We sent 250 T-shirts to a neo-Nazi rock festival as a gift, as a free gift. And they had a double printing. So the first print was Hardcore Rebels, National and Free. And the second print was what your T-shirt can do, you can also do. We help you to leave the far right or the right-wing extremist scene. And the point was that after the first washing, the T-shirt changed their signs. So at first they see only their Hardcore Rebel, and later, after washing, they had this second print with the contact details for Exit Germany. So that was our first campaign, just to have an very funny, very unexpected confrontation with our offer, with our project Exit Germany. Our second campaign was delivered 2014 in Wunsiedel. It was called Nazis Against Nazis. And the idea was to combine something like a walkathon with their demonstrators themselves, so that they pay for their own exit. So for every meter they walk to this town in Wunsiedel, they donated involuntary 10 euros for Exit Germany. And now there's the question, okay, that's a funny joke, but does it work? The idea is generally to say, we want to get attention. We want to get more visibility for our project, for our offer. And that's the reason why we always combine campaigns like this with the exit offer of seeding doubts and saying, okay, there's a chance to change. And I've one chat here on the picture, it's in German, but it's a real chat from our Facebook channel. And someone was writing last year to us and asking, okay, is the picture you just published there, is it from Wunsiedel? I said, yes. And he said, okay. At that time, I was part of the right-wing scene and I was there. It's a long time ago, but I know. And I said, okay, fine. Let me tell about it. Let me tell you. Tell me about your situation and how you see this. And he write back, okay, you mean as someone who was there? Yes. It was quite hard for us. At the first time, we didn't see it, or I didn't see it really clear. But at some point, a lot of people pointed out and said, okay, there's something, look at this. And it was quite hard for us to realize this. And later he said, and I was also at the concert in 2011 in Thuringia. So he was on both campaigns in Thuringia and also in Wunsiedel. And the idea wasn't to say, okay, you get the T-shirt or you wear on the demonstration in Wunsiedel and you have the feeling, okay, now I have to exit. No, the idea is a little bit deeper. So just to bring up the offer, and at some point, some people want to change. They knew exit because of the campaigns. Maybe they were at the festival or they were on the demonstration, something like this. It's just to show our offer to get more visibility. And that was everything that worked well out. So we had some people said, okay, respect, nice action. So also neo-Nazis said this. We had attention, we had also visibility. Some were very angry about this, sure. But at least we had more requests and we had more presence in the media. And that was our goal, just to have this media and the buzz in our target, but also in the main society. So what are the lessons learned? in that cases. So you have to know your audience. So you have to analyze the target audience. You have to know how they speak and which channels they use for your campaigns. You have to have social media. You have to use social media, and in the best way you connect offline and online. It has to be user oriented. So I saw a lot of campaigns, and mostly they address the target group like neo-Nazis, but they don't speak in a way, and they don't use the pictures and the narratives these target groups uses. So that's very problematic. Irritation could be also one point to get attention and to seed some doubts, not in the usual way to react on demonstrations or other kinds of right-wing extremist narratives. And you need partners for this, because campaigns like this I described, you don't do this alone. So you have to have professional partners and a lot of different backgrounds for campaigns like this. We also involve our formers in that campaigns just to check if these campaigns could work, if the wording is fine. So different partners for this, but at least you need some inspiration, some luck for this kind of campaigns, and also maybe restrictions we every time have. Don't see it as a problem, maybe see it also as a part to boost creativity or to boost some ideas, to think outside the box, to step ahead, to find new ways.
All right, so I'm going to tell you a couple of things about the game, and then we'll show you a trailer, which is about, I think, 1 minute and 20 seconds to have an idea of how the game works. So how did this all start? It was basically starting with the observation that gamification has become very important in the area of terrorism and extremism. So not only do organizations recruit people, for example, in online forums, but also they use games in order to mobilize individuals and to basically reach out to especially young people. So for just to give you 2 examples, identitarians have developed the game called Heimat Defender. Heimat is homeland, so Homeland Defender, which is basically an ego shooter kind of game where you basically shoot a number of enemies of the cause, and they are, of course, very many. But also the Islamic State has adapted, for example, the game Grand Theft Auto. And has also used it in their campaign. So there's, in the meantime, quite some literature on this issue. But for us, from the perspective of prevention, the question was, well, we know how these games work for the extremists. How do we make them work for our purposes? Given that you basically cannot have a person shooting around other people, that is not really the idea. And also, it's difficult to implement some of the mechanisms which are really basic for games, such as, for example, gaining points. Yeah. So how do you bring this kind of game mechanics to the area of prevention? So what we did is basically to develop something in which the player is the main actor. So depending on how you decide, the story goes in one direction or another. So it's an interactive game, and we basically combined a number of elements in order to make it more exciting, because we knew young people have so many offers out there. Why would they decide for this at all? So what we did with the game developers was to introduce, for example, mini games, so you can gain points whilst doing this. Also, there's short videos, and the whole thing looks like a social media interface. So because the idea was to make it look familiar to young people, depending on what, because we know, for example, we did as a preparation for this, a survey to figure out what platforms they most use, and of course it was Instagram, not Facebook. So we kind of got some inspiration from these kinds of choices. Just a couple of words on the preparation, because one of the issues at the time, this was, by the way, in the first batch of CSAP program projects. So at the time, it was still an issue, the fact that there were many campaigns out there, but with not much preparatory work. So for our project, it was very important to, first of all, get some reliable data on, for example, target audience. So what kind of products do they like? What is their online behavior? What kind of themes are they interested in? Also political themes. We carried out interviews with former and active radicalized people in both jihadism and right-wing extremism, and also we analyzed the online propaganda of these two types of organizations. What we also did in the end is to evaluate the game, but perhaps I say something about that in the end. So what do we do? How did we match those challenges? First, we took a number of aspects that we found, especially in the interviews, and problematized them during the game. For example, I think, especially for this era of right-wing extremism, a major role is played by the issue of everyday racism. So you have this kind of low-level racism that you see everywhere in the press or by certain parties that is not necessarily identified as such. So people are kind of, it has become normalized a little bit, mainstream or normalized. And by showing these kinds of pictures out of the context, we created a kind of a shock effect. People were like, whoa, what's this? Well, it's just a daily, it's a daily newspaper. So to realize that radicalization or this kind of racist attitudes start actually at a very early stage and already be aware of that. What we also did, because there's dialogue in the game as well, we deconstructed certain arguments, such as, for example, that women are empowered in this new right wave. I mean, they present women very prominently and they present as if they were, women power in a different context. Well, actually, no, it's the same patriarchal societal structure that gets propagated again. Also, the idea of understanding that, what starts as something small and normal can actually lead to something very dramatic, such as death or violence or whatever, by showing basically the end result of these things that appear perhaps harmless at the beginning. Also, in this context, I think what is very important is how do you talk about the historical past, so about National Socialism. So, for example, in Austria, there's much talk about it. People have to go to visit concentration camps, pupils. And they understand this and they think it's bad, but they see it in the past. They don't make the connection to the contemporary right-wing extremism. Yeah, which presents itself as something completely different from what used to be. So there's a discussion about this, for example, as well, but also certain mechanisms that we know from the literature on disengagement. So why people disengage. So we built in some of those things as well. And of course, we built a couple of alternative narratives. So for example, say, okay, I acknowledge that you have a certain concern, that you see some injustice out there. There are other ways to fight against. You don't have to join an extremist organization. And just one word on the evaluation. So there was a couple of evaluations with the young people in a kind of experiment, quasi-experiment. So before and after, and we checked on attitudes, and we saw some change in attitudes after playing the game. But also there were also other kinds of comments and reactions that we got from people who just by themselves decided to test their game in the classroom, for example. What I was wondering is, what do you do with individuals that are, say, like more on the intellectual side? Is it even possible to reach out to them, and what, with what?
I think campaigns doesn't work alone. So we try to have a bigger picture. We have these campaigns to get attention, to get special attention, but also we try to have a bigger public relation. So we try to deliver like these podcasts, like these stories of farmers, and not only farmers with their foot soldiers, something like this. So also farmers who are well known in the hardcore neo-Nazi scene. And that's important because there's something like trust. So if there are doubts for someone who's active in a scene, and that person see, okay, there's someone like this former leader of this Nazi party, and he's now a former, he's now at Exit or something like this, that builds a little bit of trust to say, okay, this one did that step, so maybe it's also possible for me. And also to share these stories to see these doubts, and but also to have a mirror that they see. Okay, there are other stories that are quite similar to my situation or to my problems or whatever. Just as to stimulate something like changing something. So we try to have also different stories and also different formers who work together with us. Some more on the intellectual level, some more on their basic level. So just to say, okay, look at this. There are quite similar stories, and there is a change to change something. And I'm not the friend of these very scientific, not in your case. So yours is a combination of scientific and biographical experience. But I'm not a friend of these science or practitioners or looking at the target group and trying to engage with them in a more realistic way, in a very I'm on the right side, come on, step to me, I will help you. I don't think that will work, because these target group, maybe some of them are attend for 20 years. They are not kids. They knew how the world works in a strange way, but they knew it. And I think we have to be very, very, very careful how we engage with them and how we speak to them, and don't speak to him like kids. It doesn't work.
I have a question for Daniela about the game. I missed which age category is active in your game, and I was wondering, do you also work with older people, and how do you reach them? And I was wondering also, is the role of the game mainly preventive, or does it also contribute to exit work?
So thanks a lot for the question. That basically there is a difference between our two campaigns, because Fabian's addresses basically people who are already radicalized. So we're talking about tertiary prevention, whereas ours addresses primary and secondary prevention. So we're not trying to de-radicalize people because we know that it doesn't work just through a campaign like this. Because for this kind of work, you actually need, as was said before, long-term interventions. And of course, you can use this product as well, but it has to be, as it were, accompanied by offline work, and it has to go over a longer period of time. It's as of 16, because we thought that we wanted actually to make it as of 14, but then we realized, after also consulting the age kind of categories with games in general, so depending on the language, the kind of ideas and images that you show, violence, that kind of stuff, but also considering when people or young people start to interest themselves in politics, for example, and when do they have a certain maturity to deal with these issues, because we didn't want to radicalize people. So we wanted them to be, to be able to deal with these issues and not be absorbed by them. So to have this kind of critical thinking, complex thinking, and so forth. And about older, so this is indeed for younger people, and we didn't have any other choice, because it was, this reflects obviously in the design. So we surveyed to see what young people have as preferences, and these are different to preferences of, like older people. Also, for example, here in Austria, or I think also in Germany, older people tend to be on Facebook, whereas younger people not at all, and definitely not on Twitter. So and that also reflected where we place the product as well. So we use Instagram a lot, a little bit of YouTube. And also we use Let's Players. If you guys know, these are people who play games online, and they tend, depending on the person, they can have a huge kind of number of followers. And we also use two of them, of these people to kind of play it online to see, how people react, but also to kind of have this reach out. But just lastly, the game can, however, also be used, as I said, in de-radicalization work, if it's one of the methods that you have. So if, for example, it was requested by an association that does e-learning programs in prisons, and they wanted to have the game to work with inmates, because the game, among others, shows how radicalization occurs, like what the steps are, what the arguments are, So it can also be used in this way as well.
For me, it would be interesting to see how their students and kids react on this. So their direct feedback, if they play it through. Did you have any complete direct feedback that they say, okay, it's interesting, or did you develop the project also a little bit more with the feedback of the kids or the students?
Yeah, so we were in contact, especially with a number of youth centers, and we went there a couple of times during the development of the game itself. So when the first ideas kind of came up, or the first dialogues, we already went there to see, what do they think about it. And in general, I think it depends. I mean, you can, of course, it's a very broad range of attitudes. For some, the language was too strong. For others, it wasn't strong enough, for example. So, but also, I think what really was, I think for us was very impressive was because for the story, it wasn't for the right wing. One of the story, the female jihadi story, was basically a patchwork of various elements. Obviously, as we're all, but in that one case, one girl said, this basically sounds like my own story. We were like, whoa. I think the game is quite close to reality. It was originally actually in German, I forgot to say. But we've seen also at the international events that people played it and they said, whoa, I recognize this, for example, in a French context. Because of course, the details of the propaganda are sometimes specific to the country. Yeah, but the mechanisms of radicalization are actually quite common, and also between the two. I think it definitely has the potential of transferability in that sense.
How did you identify the audiences that you promoted it with, and how did you promote it?
Especially for this area of right-wing extremism, it was difficult to identify people by, say, socioeconomic features, because as we know, they are nowadays all over the place. So all kinds, you have students, you have poor, you have rich, intellectuals. So what we did is, when we targeted online, we worked with preferences. So preferences in terms of entertainment, and also, for example, certain celebrities which expressed kind of right-wing extremist opinions. So, target people who like that, for example. Oh, and how did we know what entertainment preferences? From the interviews, because in the interviews with the radicalized people, we asked them, so what kind of music are you listening to? What kind of games do you play? And these kind of things. And then we use this information to target people then. And they didn't have to be necessarily right-wing music. Many of them listen to rap, hip hop, just like regular stuff. So, yeah. And in this way, we also avoided stigmatizing certain people, with certain places or certain ethnicities.
One lesson that I can add to that is that, because we were mostly researchers involved in this diagnostic phase, as I can assume in the Decount project as well. One lesson we learned is to not think so much as sociologists or as researchers, but as marketing specialists. What Daniela exactly said, basically asking about preferences of people, like their behavior, what they like, what they don't like, and not so much with the end goal of writing an academic article, because that's not the objective,
And I think there's also the question of their how to communicate. We had in our campaigns partnered with a commercial agency. So they did it since 10 years. They work pro bono for Exit. And we create all our campaigns together with them. So we dropped their idea and they built their homepage and all that kind of stuff. And that's very, very good, because most of the work we couldn't do alone because of the money and because of their technical skills. So, and that, something like this, but the point is also, we knew each other since 10 years. So normally campaigns or ad agencies, they work like they have an idea, call their NGO saying, here's the idea, please deliver this idea. And then they take the idea, the agency, and go to an award and want to get some prize for this. And I think that's also not the way how it should work. So it's very important to have a good collaboration with agencies in that way, not just delivering some gold ideas. That's, I think, a very problematic development the last 10 years.
And another thing that Fabian actually mentioned is with the way I understood it is that you need to be realistic with your objectives. Because I think there's a kind of this misconception that people that are not so experienced with campaigns have when they start developing a campaign, that okay, you do the perfect research and then you have your messages and so on, and the end result will be that you'll change people's attitudes. I don't think that's the case, and I'll be happy to hear what people, what Daniela and Fabian think about that. We found from our experience, we are also at the end of our campaign. It's called Find Another Way. It's also funded by CSEP. It's that's an unrealistic objective. The best we could hope for is to kind of make people exit the echo chambers that they're normally moving in for a second and just put them in another space where they can hear alternative kind of viewpoints and hear a discussion that's not possible in the echo chambers. And just to give you one example, like for instance, with our campaign, of course, it's a one year, the online campaign was 1 year. And of course, we produced a lot of like videos and social media content and so on. And from the comments we received constantly, we saw that there is a small group of people that are very kind of not very prone to change in terms of their attitudes. But the funny thing is they kept coming, they kept watching, they were watching the whole thing, all of the materials, and they were engaging in discussions, which I think it's a good indicator for at least some success, and not thinking that, okay, now with this perfect campaign, you can change people's attitudes and you can measure it actually and see it. Because as Fabian said, a campaign, it's a drop in the ocean. You need to have like a lot of other measures surrounding this.
I just want to reply to it. I think that's true. If we only had the goal or if the goal is to make a campaign and make people change their mind, it doesn't work. I think the biggest success for campaigns in that kind of field is to seed some doubts, to get attention, to get noticed. That is what, in the way of exit work, not in a general campaign on equality and something like this, but in a way of exit work, engaging with this target group. There's a need just to get attention. So because nobody will change because of a T-shirt or a campaign or whatever, but there are some doubts. There are some people who are thinking about, and to give them a possible way or a possible solution, that's the biggest goal out of our perspective.
I think it's very difficult in general for one campaign to reach a really broad range of people. You know, they probably work better when they're as targeted and specific as possible. And so we would look at things like our referral statistics and look at the demographics of the edges and the geographical locations where people are being referred from. And then that's where we would focus our intervention. But it's been said already, one campaign on its own, is rarely enough, and there needs to be more than that. I think one of the things that we try and do in Leicester in the UK is we try to work with as many local organisations as possible when it comes to delivering projects and outreach programmes and workshops, because in that way we can tap into their existing networks and their existing experience of youth work, for instance, and we can build their capacity and train them in some of the more complex, nuanced issues around extremism. And then that means that if, for instance, next year our funding gets cut, at least then we've built that knowledge at a local level and we've got a network of local groups that can continue to work in that space. Because as well as campaigns needing more behind them than just the one launch, if you like. Obviously, we can't rely on funding year in, year out, especially given, you know, the year we've just had with the COVID pandemic and the impact that will have had on everybody's budgets, for instance. So there's no one size fits all, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
One really important issue is the sustainability that Rosita was mentioning at the beginning. And I think we all agree that basically, I think there's a certain expectation that you develop the magic product and then you change everybody's minds and that's it. I'm missing this kind of sustainable thinking where basically you have something that goes on for a long time and you can add and add and add, of course, more tools and more approaches, but it has to go over a longer time period. And these kinds of programs I don't really see funded at the moment.
And Daniela, I think it's not only the campaigns that need to be sustainable, but what we found is kind of you need this whole infrastructure, supportive infrastructure, because for instance, in our diagnostics, we found that of course you need to have role models, be it in school or parents and so on. And maybe in Germany and Austria is different, but in Bulgaria, where we implemented our campaign, you don't have this, because it's very important when you want to preach a message, no matter how softly and skillfully you do it, you want also the environment to support that message. And when you have a context where actually these ideas are not supported, actually it's actually the opposite, where society is not sanctioning certain things systematically, like racism or discrimination and so on. And when this normalization and mainstreaming that we were talking about, it goes so deeply that people don't even think about it. So, okay, you have a nice campaign, but kids are still going out, they're going to school and they're going back to their families and so on. And, how do you deal with that? That's a big challenge, I would say.
Yeah, and I think campaigns are one part of strategic communication. That's what they are, and that's what they deliver, at least. And for this strategic delivering and for this strategic communication, you need some NGOs, partners on the ground, which are doing the work, at least. So if you only sending campaigns, there's also no goal and there's no result, at least, because it's only a campaign telling people how to do or not. But if you combine these campaigns with an idea and maybe also with some idea of solution and redirect this solution to the local community or local groups, NGOs or whatever, and provide them with their back office of funding and all that kind of stuff, then you will solve problems, but you don't solve problems in sending out campaigns, at least.
In the UK, the counterterrorism policing have a phrase that they use quite a lot, which is that communities can defeat terrorism. And I often thought that sounded very simplistic, but in so many ways it's true. We can't do this alone. It requires a whole society approach, and it needs the buy-in of people from across different agencies. So it's not just law enforcement and NGOs, but also local municipalities and health and education. I think it's important that there's buy-in from all of those different agencies to tackle this.